What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here, and it's time for patch 10.21 for League of Legends. This is, of course, not the preseason patch. That is coming in, I think, 4 weeks? I don't think it's going to be only 2. So usually point 23 tends to be preseason, if not whatever, it's down the line. This is for solo queue. It's not going to affect pro. It technically affects preseason because these changes are going to stay in the game when that happens. But ultimately, it's them mostly targeting solo queue so that our end of season climb can work, and there's some good changes in here, so let's get into it. A couple of very small rants, maybe. Also worth noting, it is for me 11:24 a.m. I've been up all night because of world schedule. 11 a.m. is normally about the time I go to bed, so this is my equivalent like 2 to 3 a.m. on like a regular schedule. So I'm a little tired. If it looks that way, that's the reason. Hopefully my brain's not so fried that I suck at this, at least not more than normal. Let's get into it. Aphelios, Corki, Karma, Lee Sin, Trundle, Udyr buffs, Camille, Graves, Hecarim, Nidalee, Pantheon, Samira nerfs. All of those nerfs are aimed at ultra high elo, which I find kind of interesting, that this is all absurdly high pick and ban rate in Diamond 2 Plus. None of this is for generic win rate, though that said, a large percentage of these champions are like worthwhile bans in mid elo as well. So there's at least some positive overlap for the mere plebs of us. I guess Hecarim is a mare, so let's get into it. For real this time. So Aphelios is getting 1 to 6 more lethality. Now, lethality is functionally flat armor penetration, meaning that it's better against squishies than it is against tanks. Armor lethality, rather, as a stat, is front-loaded, which makes it more of an early game stat. You get 60% of lethality at level 1, technically like 60.2, or like 62%, but whatever, up to 100% at level 18. And if you think about it, the champion gets like a third-ish of their armor at level 1. Well, a third of their armor is at level 1, but 6% lethality is at level 1. Lethality is an early game stat. Anyway, with that in mind, that's good consideration in the math in and of itself. Moonlight Vigil, of course, also getting buffed in the ultimate, so it's 20 to 30 damage per champion hit for your auto attack. For the mark damage, you're getting 50 to 100 extra healing. Root duration's up by a quarter. Infernum Splash damage is up by 1/7. And additional chakrams is 1/3 more per target hit. So some of that's worth mathing, some of that's not, because it's pretty easy. So let's go into the numbers that we can actually use as we get blasted with brightness. The camera refocuses because reasons, who knows. So if you were to max E first, now I don't think this is correct, by the way, considering that you get 4 attack damage per rank if you were to rank up attack damage, and your base attack damage is 60-ish? You're getting 4 over 60, which is like, to be fair, about 6%. So as I retcon what I just said, the math gets kind of close. The difficulty being that lethality works on your autos and your abilities against enemy champions. It does not help you last hit. Minions have 0 armor and magic resist, and for good reason. I'm glad that's the case, which means that you don't help your wave clear or last hitting at all by putting points into E early game. Instead, Q and W give you attack damage and attack speed, which do help your wave clear and whatnot. So I don't realistically see E max being viable or good even. At least not ideal. Maybe it's viable, but like lots of things are viable but bad. So ultimately, this is using, I forget what my example champion was, but I picked someone with reasonable armor for bottom lane. That wasn't Braum, because Braum and co have extremely high armor. Look, there's a lot of variance in base stats in bot lane. I picked a regular champion that isn't an absurd support tank with 45 armor at level 1. And this is the before and after of how much damage his ability deals. Now, of course, at level 18, you can just, compare before and after, and it's the same at level 18. This is exactly the same what the ability is going to be. Your lethality is up indeed by a whole 6 points, and this is the damage difference, right? So that part's kind of easy. Ultimately, assuming I did the math right, which I'm pretty sure I did, this is the situation that we're in, which is, hey, this is a 2 to 10% damage amp because of this buff. That's the ultimate end result. If you're not hitting tanks, you have a 2 to 10% increased damage if you're doing Emax. Even at the very end game, when you've maxed E because you have nothing else to put points into, it's still a 7% damage amp against hard squishies, which, yeah, okay, that's where you're going with this. There's a chance that the math's slightly wrong, but it's going to be pretty close to accurate. That's roughly what you're getting here. That's the power you're getting out of this. At the end of the day, are you going to max E? No, but there's the math for you. It's not garbage, but you're probably still not doing it. Next up in line is the bonus damage in the R, the bonus healing on the R based on what gun you have. Most of them are up by 25%. This is the best I could do on Calibrum ult damage. So the ult has a base hit. It then marks people. You then auto-attack them with Calibrum, which means it takes, the ult base damage, your total attack damage, because you have to auto them. It takes the fact that you have a Calibrum mark in and of the first place, or just in the first place, I guess. And then it does the ulti bonus damage on top. So there's 4 numbers here that are all getting added together. I believe that's the correct math. I am not 100% certain. But anyway, you're getting about 6% more damage as a result of this. And this is before attack damage ratios. The more attack damage you have, the less this matters. But as far as the base damage is concerned, it's 6% more. And it's 6% more per target hit. You're 6, then 12, then 18, then 24 is going to remain pretty much true, right? This is 20 flat damage when, yeah, ult auto attack is going to do 320 damage. It's not going to do 340 damage, but another 20 per other target hit, which is not bad compared to pre-patch. Up to 30 per target hit, which is still not bad compared to pre-patch. The healing is up a flat 25%. That's how the math works out here, which is exactly the same of what you're getting in Gravitum Root. It's, this is 14%. This is 33%. Like, yeah, you're getting a fairly reasonable ult buff. Now, I want to point out again that the Severum heal is going up, but the damage isn't, right? The ult does 2 things. It does damage and heal. The heal goes up by 25%. In the Calibrum case, the total damage, including the auto attack afterwards, is up 6% per champion hit. So who knows, it's not an easy one-to-one in all these cases, but you're going to have some situations going on, and there's numbers for you. Next up, we move on to Camille. And by the way, Aphelios is still going to be a garbage can solo queue. It's just going to take time. They need to do more buffs. He's not good enough yet. Camille is losing 0 to 20% more attack speed on hookshot. Now, I want to point out that Camille maxes E second as far as I can tell. That is the expected ability order. You max Q, then you max E, which means she's the same champion, levels 1 through 7. And then eventually, as you lose 20% attack speed, your ultimate power trough is right here. And yeah, at the end of the day, no matter what, you're going to lose about 0.13 attacks per second. That's the math of it, which is a 10% attack speed nerf. But of course, at level 13 with max hookshot, you would already have Triforce. I'm pretty sure Camille probably runs attack speed in the first stat shard. I'm not using items and runes for this math. I never do. It's not worth it. The actual change the math is so small, it's not worth the effort. End of the day, it also keeps consistent regardless. And yeah, I mean, this is a fairly meaningful dueling nerf. This, I would say, especially opens her up to late game situations where other fighters can try to win the 1v1. Now, champions like Jax kind of already win, but let's say, a mid to late game Renekton has a stronger chance of beating her because, yeah, she does 8 to 10% less DPS. That's not trivial. That's gonna be an auto attack or 2 down the line, and considering your autos do 250 damage, yeah, that's meaningful, right? Now, to be fair, it actually won't mean a full auto or 2 because I think the attack speed buff is like 4 seconds long, and a 4-second long buff where you're losing 0.1 attacks per second means you're actually losing 0.4 auto attacks, roughly. Like, that's kind of the actual math. So really, you do 120 less damage. 120 damage is a lot of damage, to be clear. So even if you do try to go all the way down the line with the math, it's like, well, no, this is actually still pretty meaningful. Things like this, like these numbers here, they really do depend on the attack speed duration. Also things like attack resets, depending on how mechanically proficient you are, may or may not affect this, because theoretically the attack being faster does synergize perfectly fine one-to-one with attack resets. But we're human, and we're going to always attack reset late, which means we're going to waste some attack speed. We have 2 attack resets on both halves of Q, right? And if we're ever silly and using W in the middle of it, or R in the middle of it, or all these other things, we're losing more of our attack speed. So, to some degree, we're wasting some of this, compared to someone like Jax, who almost has no animations that he cares about, or they're so quick that it doesn't matter at all. Camille ignores some of her attack speed with her spellcasts. Regardless, it's a pretty small deal. To discount all that, this is a reasonable nerf. Camille will lose some win rate, and that seems fine. Next up, we have Corki getting a 40% increase to his Q-AD ratio. That's the math. Not much to talk about there. The base damage is fairly high. It'll take quite a bit to get significant bumps here in the queue, but you may find yourself on Manamune suddenly being able to one-shot caster minions, which is really useful. This will hit wave clear breakpoints sometimes where you'll find yourself being able to kill melees with a QR. And that's really nice, or Q and an auto, or whatever. Like, those breakpoints will happen. This will manifest in win rate. Corki will sometimes one-shot that Zed that he wasn't going to survive otherwise. This is a pretty nominal buff. As always, these nerfs tend to be aiming at about 1 to 1.5%, and that will kind of be the... Yeah, I mean, 1% will kind of be like the generic expected win rate change in most of these cases. If I think it's way too big, way too small, I'll usually point that out, but otherwise, yeah, we're usually aiming about there. That's what it seems to be with the designers, which is fine. Next up, Graves is losing 2 bonus armor per quick draw, and really it's more like 4 bonus armor per quick draw because you get 2 stacks when you quick draw towards an enemy champion, which is a lot of the time. Not all the time, of course, but pretty frequently. So here is the math. And by the way, Graves E stacks up to 8 stacks, so the math gets really, really big. Now, if you only get 1 stack ever, which is like while you're clearing blue, which by the way can't touch you if you play appropriately, here's the math regardless. 2 armor, considering you have some base armor, is always to the tune of about 1.3% durability. And yeah, here we are, right? So, you know, losing to the tune of 1.3 to eventually 1% durability. Graves' base armor is reasonably high. Of course, the actual E scaling is quite a bit as well, considering that it goes up to 20 or 18. Yeah, he still has 91 armor at level 18. That's quite high for a champion who gets bonus armor through his E. I know they have buffed Graves' base stats up and down and around to make him pickable and balanced and people wanting to play him and whatnot. And Graves is always in this weird spot where like his win rate's never been that bad and yet people just stopped playing him and who knows. He probably should have been meta for a while, but whatever. But it's worth pointing out this is a champion who gets 18 bonus armor per E stack and still has 91 armor at level 18. That seems kind of high. Oh well. Either way, though, this is with 1 stack. Obviously, you can pretty much just double this difference every single time per stack. It's pretty much going to be the case. And then if we get all the way up to 8 stacks, we get, you know, an 8 to 5% durability drop. It's not exactly 1, but you can't exactly multiply directly. That's how the math works. But yeah, it's still a pretty decent drop. But regardless, losing 2, aka 16 bonus armor, goes from 251 to 235. That is indeed still a 5% physical durability drop, which is even in these extreme cases where you'd think it wouldn't matter that much, actually still going to matter. Now, are you going to get 4 forward quick draws in every team fight? Of course not. But hey, just so you know, that's where the math lies. You're somewhere between these numbers. You're somewhere between 1 and 7% durability loss against physical damage. Okay. I personally really would have loved to see Graves not have high for a ranged champion base armor and let him rely more on quick draw. It's an easy change here, of course, but it also allows it to be an early game focused nerf, which, to be fair, is, I think, deserving. But, you know, they could have done the base stat thing instead. Not mad about it or anything, just, you know. Generally like to see base stats be average if they have a buff somewhere instead of being above average with the buff somewhere. But it's a pretty minor thing overall. Next up, we get Hecarim, who's going to lose 10, aka 20 damage on his E. 10 damage is if you're literally melee range, just like, whoop, it's an attack reset. Realistically, you're getting the 20 damage version a lot of the time. This is much more frequently. You're charging into lane. You are doing it as part of your trade pattern. You know, you're doing it from 400 range away, then galloping in and going. Yeah, sometimes you're going to be somewhere in the middle. You're doing like the 15, 16, 17 damage difference. It scales linearly with distance as far as I can tell. Regardless, this is still a pretty meaningful nerf of, hey, 20 damage and all in. 20 damage is 20 damage. It's not meaningless. So here's the math before and after. This is assuming you have, you know, just it requires an artifact to do this. So it's your total AD plus the minimum damage. And then on the other side, plus the maximum damage. You max E second, whether you're playing top lane or jungle. And yeah, I mean, it's not that bad of a nerf. I mean, it's pretty meaningful is what I want to say here. This is a 5 to 10% damage drop in most cases, 13% in the really early game, especially because, again, first 7 levels, this is 1 point, and 20 damage when your damage is not that high. Yes, E really does 150 damage at 1 point. This ability is very, very strong. Extremely, extremely strong for a 1 point skill. Yes, sure, it's rolling in your total attack damage in the first place, but I mean, it's still 70 damage and a bunch of move speed. It's still a good ability. Hecarim, getting his second nerf. Now it's interesting because Hecarim, of course, was buffed to get him into everyone's eyes. Saw some pro play, saw a ton of solo queue play, was the best champion in the game for a while. They reverted part of the nerf. He was still OP. They reverted, well, not even should say reverted. Maybe this is a revert of something else from down the line, but, you know, lowering even more of his damage. And I gotta say, I am happy they're keeping some of the move speed part of the E. They're just saying, well, let's make him less bursty. Let's make him less of sort of a good ganker early game. Let's keep the cool move speed stuff because that makes Hecarim Hecarim. I love changes like this. I love them, you know, finding a change, putting it in, saying, okay, that's too much, and then nerfing something else. Even on the same ability, that's fine, but nerfing something else because speedy horse go burr, and that's awesome. Yeah, so there's that. So now we get one that's actually interesting and kind of fun to dive into. This was one that I signed myself up for a very small rant on, and I think it'll be a positive thing, so let's talk about it. Karma's getting a fairly small reshape to our passive refund works. So Mantra's cooldown is going from 45 to 36 to 40 to 34. So it is a 5 to 2 second cooldown buff. Okay, outright buff to R's cooldown. Great. In addition, the mantra refund for abilities goes from 2, 3, 4 to 2, 3.5, 5, and it scales sooner. Okay, buff and buff. What's the catch? Well, there is a nerf. The refund for basic attacks is going from 1 to 1.5, 2 to just 1 flat. So it's 2 buffs and a nerf. Where is it really? And my opinion here is buff overall. So let's first talk about the easy stuff, which is here's the straight up buff, right? It is a buff of 5 seconds, and then of 4 seconds, and then of 3 seconds, and then of 2 seconds. So that is a straight buff for the first 6 levels or so, right? And then, because at level 7, she got her attack buff thing, right? 7 and 13 are the breakpoints. At level 7, she used to get an extra 0.5 on the cooldown every auto attack, which, well, if you autoed 8 times would get you your thing back, right? You'd get your stuff back. 8 autos in the span of 40 seconds? I mean, that seems pretty reasonable. Now, to be clear, if you're autoing 8 times, you're reducing the cooldown by 8 seconds. So it's 8 autos in 34 seconds. Yeah, that seems reasonable, right? That seems totally doable. Actually, sorry, this is the number. Can you get 8 autos off in 30 seconds? Of course you can. 8 autos in 30 seconds is not hard. You can get 20 autos in 30 seconds if you're not, you know, disturbed in the wave at all. So yeah, in a lot of cases, this is maybe more of a nerf. But, you know, whatever. We're coloring it green because we're just doing a color scale. Who cares? And then, okay, the cooldown goes down to 3 second difference. So now it's 6 autos makes the difference. And then we spike again. At level 13, we now have a full 1 second difference, right? It takes 3 autos to go from 39 to 36, you know, to match at 33 and then get farther on down the line. Yeah, that's pretty easy for level 13 Karma to auto attack 3 times in the span of 30 seconds. Pretty sure we can do that one. That's not going to be much of a problem. And then even later down the line, we're level 16. The cooldown difference is 2 seconds. The cooldown difference per auto attack is a full 1 second. Yes, we can auto twice in the span of 32 seconds at level 16. This is easy to do. So, okay, in some cases, wait, this is a nerf. What are you doing? Hold on, there's more going on, right? Because, of course, well, the on-champion hit spell cooldown is getting changed. So here is the change before and after, right? Sorry, give me a second to like remember what I'm doing here. Right, okay. So, right, in the first 5 levels, if I land a spell on an enemy champion, I get 2 seconds back. That is the same. I then spike at 6. And I get this temporary, you know, 1.5 bonus. I get 3.5 off when I used to get 2 off. And then, you know, for the middle levels, it's the same, right? 3.5 compared to 3. It's still a small buff. Okay. And then level 11, I get the spike early, 5 compared to 3, 5 compared to 3, and then 5 compared to 4 for the rest of the game. So I am getting, you know, some amount of difference. But what I want to point out here is, okay, I'm getting some amount per spell on a champion, right? Somewhere between 1.5 and 1, basically, at all points in time. A couple seconds where it's 2. And then, hey, just to remind us, how much was I getting per auto attack? I was getting 0.5 per auto attack or 1 per auto attack. Well, what was I doing more often? Was I landing an auto attack or was I casting a spell hitting an enemy champion? realistically, I was probably getting an auto attack. Like, let's be clear about that one, right? That's pretty likely. But, you know, am I getting an auto attack versus a spell on enemy champion in this case as well? Yeah, probably here as well, right? 0.5 versus 0.5, sure. But hey, there's a time here where it's 0.5 per auto attack for 2 for a spell. Okay, so it's, you know, in flux, whatever's moving around. But again, keep in mind that we still got a base cooldown change. So what does this mean for Karma overall? Because there's a lot going on, right? Buff, nerf, they're spiking at different times. What's going on here? Ultimately, I think this is a change that is meant to buff support Karma. Support Karma, generally speaking, yeah, she's probably supposed to be lane dominant, but I would argue she is less able to auto-attack on cooldown when there's champions like Blitzcrank and Pyke and Thresh and Nautilus and Leona running around. Especially considering the fact that Karma so frequently goes Relic Shield because she is afraid of Thresh and Pyke and Nautilus and Leona. Top Karma, however, is pretty much never afraid of Ornn. Top Karma is autoing on cooldown. So this is a nerf for lane Karma, well, solo lane Karma, because they're autoing consistently, and less of a nerf and arguably a straight buff for support Karma. They're trying to shift power around to make that work better. And here's where I want to get into the thing I signed myself up for on a very small sort of rant or diatribe or whatever, because Karma has non-standard leveling now. And I don't really care about the 1-7-13 thing, that's done a lot, but Karma doesn't have a level 16 spike. Now, she still ranks her ultimate at level 16, but she doesn't have a level 16 bump here. And one thing I've been giving a lot of thought to for a while is consistency. And I think I've been conflating consistency with too many things. So I got a word for it recently because I saw a tweet from Morello, which I appreciated, because it gave me a vocabulary word to use. Consistency is one thing, and the other is intentional design. It's doing things for a reason and a very specific reason. And I was kind of conflating these things too much. You know, if you're building a, you know, modern day turn-based RPG, you might give all assault rifles more armor penetration than all shotguns. That is consistent, but it's also intentional. It's, hey, assault rifles are the guns you use to pierce armor. Shotguns are going to be good against fleshy targets. Shotguns probably have better spread than assault rifles do, or whatever. And it's like, yes, they're consistent because all shotguns do that, but is that really consistency, or is that just sort of intentional design? And I'm just kind of hoping I'm using that phrase correctly, and maybe I'm not because I'm not in that many design circles. But consistency is good because it helps you learn things, and consistency is good because it gives you it allows you and tells you to be obvious when you're breaking consistency. It says, I am breaking consistency for an intentional reason. I am intentionally doing this because I'm getting results out of it, as opposed to I am breaking consistency because it happened to be this way. And that's the part that I have trouble with is, I mean, I think every single game on the planet is going to have this, where there's going to be inconsistent elements because game development is messy, and that's okay. It's going to happen, and it doesn't have to matter, although it's nice to be consistent when you can. This here, what I'm highlighting, to get back on topic, is a break from consistency for a good reason. Karma has a problem of being too much of a flex pick, right? Her Q is like the perfect wave clear tool, and they could nerf Karma Q against minions. They could do all kinds of things to really try to push her out of lane. And maybe they really should just make Q do less to minions and just be done with it, right? Like, maybe that should just be the change when you're not happy with these supportive champions going into lanes. That's what it feels like this is about, by the way. Honestly, that's what this feels like, is trying to push her away from lanes. So to get onto it, though, it's Karma doesn't have a level 16 cooldown spike. She just doesn't. Why? Because support Karma doesn't hit level 16, but solo lane Karma does. So here, just don't receive a power spike. Like, I'm a fan of that. I actually am. It takes a very specific problem and says, well, supports don't have this, so we can nerf this as much as we want. It doesn't matter. I I mean, if they really wanted to, they could just not give Karma rank 3 of an ultimate. That would feel pretty bad, to be clear. But they could. I wouldn't want them to. But, I mean, we can think about this, right? Like, where are all the buffs centered here? Well, Mantra is buffed by 5 seconds at rank 1. It's buffed by 2 seconds at rank 4 at level 16, right? The buffs are early game focused. You don't even lose auto attack cooldown reduction until level 7 and 13 later on. That's pretty far down the line, realistically. Cool. I'm also a fan of, just in general, making these scalings more interesting than this scaling. Landing cooldowns, landing spells on enemy champions is more interesting than autoing minions. So yeah, that's also kind of interesting as well. End of the day, again, this breaks consistency for what I think is a good reason. It is intentionally done to serve a specific goal, and I think that's fine. I actually, as this is like 30 seconds, spent a lot of the morning leading into this doing a bunch of research on the mana values and mana regen values of a lot of champions in League of Legends. There was a lot of inconsistency there. I'm not sure there is huge problems, but probably do a video on it sometime next week. Maybe, if I find like I have enough to say. Anyway, moving on. Lee Sin gets a late game buff of 0.5 attack damage growth. This is going to put him into fairly high AD territory down the line. Here it is. Lee Sin goes up to 133 attack damage, which is fairly high. Also, this is not Lucian. It is Lee Sin. We did it. Good job, us. We fixed the problems. We're doing amazing stuff here. Yeah, I mean, this is, I would say, actually pretty small. Lee Sin in later game scenarios, where he's getting, 4 attack damage, which is not trivial, but not amazing. He's not autoing that much because you're in scary team fights and people hurt you. Yes, you will still be in some auto attack trades. Yes, this can help your jungle clear. You can kill Dragon a bit faster and Baron a bit faster. And look, this will add up. But Lee Sin doesn't have total AD ratios. This is actually a champion where I really think he could maybe benefit from them. Lee Sin is a champion that has a lot of late game fall off, and that can be okay. It can be okay to say, look, we're picking Lee Sin because he's the early game champion, and we want him to spike early game, and that's just him. But I would say if Riot really wanted to find a way to make late game Lee Sin more viable, you could pretty easily get numbers on his Q where he wasn't any stronger 1 through 9, but would scale 10 through 18, to the tune of, well, I guess here now, 40 attack damage, which would give him about 40 damage on the Q, which, it's not bad. You don't have to do it, but you certainly could. It's a thought. Total AD ratios, by the way, tends to not influence base damages that much. Like, it's ultimately a pretty small nudge, but I mean, considering that the size of the buffs we're doing here, which is have 9 basic attack damage at level 18, I mean, even getting 20 Q damage by 18 is probably just as good or better than that. So, considering the size of these nudges, that would be a fairly big change, or it could be at least. It's a thought. Next up, we have Nidalee, who's losing 3 AD because, she's doing too well. She is certainly a very premier jungler. I do kind of wonder what Worlds would be like if Riot actually did deliver a patch between groups and quarterfinals. I don't think it would be a good idea, but hey, we found out that Lee Sin and Nidalee are, the only junglers anyone ever plays. Graves and Nidalee, the only champions anyone ever plays. Let's just nerf both by 2 AD and just, it's like a micro patch. They're like, here are the top 5 champions that everyone's playing. We'll just do very, very small base stat nerfs, right? Super low risk. Maybe stuff opens up. I don't think it's a good idea necessarily. It would create more champ select variety, but I'm not sure it'd be good for the tournament. But it's a thought though, right? Very easy, very small, 10 base health, 2 base AD, 5 move speed micro patch. I'm just kind of curious. That's all. Pantheon getting a small reshape. Pantheon is pretty much exclusively a support right now. Did not look up the win rates against the other solo lanes and whatnot, but regardless, Pantheon is losing some base damage and gaining some attack damage ratio. As always, there is a point down the line that is a break even. Want to point out, so there is a baseline Q damage. There is a critical damage, which is if they are, I believe it's 20% or lower, it does roughly double damage. The numbers moved around somewhat. And then Mortal Will is when you have 5 stacks in your passive from attacking or casting spells, there is an additional flat damage and attack damage ratio attached on top. So ultimately, where are the numbers? Well, here is the Q damage, not counting the crit version. So it's down 5 to 25 damage. And the AD ratio being up 0.15. Well, here's 5 to 25, by the way, is 7 to 12% less damage. And then with the 0.15 AD ratio, it requires between 33 and 167 bonus attack damage to equalize this nerf. Now, support Pantheon probably never reaches those numbers. Early Pantheon in lane also doesn't quite reach those numbers either. You're looking at maybe 21 if you do like a longsword plus runes start, so you're not quite there. And you're certainly not there at level 5, you're certainly not there at level 6. It's going to take a while to get there. You know, this is going to require 2 full lethality items plus runes plus maybe a little bit on top to get this far. So this is an early game nerf to Pantheon, straight up, and there's really no way around that. But if you can get the 5 stack ready for the Q and get this extra attack damage ratio on top, then suddenly the attack damage required goes a lot lower. Only requires 17 bonus AD at level 1, which, well, that's doable, actually. That's reachable with runes and items and starting items. That's not big of a problem. Yeah, the mega is a bit more difficult, but, you know, around level 8, finish a Duskblade? Maybe, right? Maybe you get there right about that point in time. And certainly, can you get to 83 attack damage by late game? Oh, absolutely. 83 bonus AD is easy for, I mean, even support Pantheon, to be clear, but, you know, that's going to take a while to get there, right? Support Pantheon has to get Umbral Glaive and the upgraded item. I mean, that's, yeah, maybe around level 9-ish, right? But it's certainly an early laning nerf to Pantheon, which, yeah, sure, that's where it is, right? And then, yeah, you're going to get way more bonus AD in a farming role, of course. It's, you know, you're not going to get much farther than 2 total items in a support, so, you know, more of a buff to lane Pantheon who's getting a lot of farm, sure. Then we move on and say, well, what about the critical? How much did this one get changed? Well, it got changed by 0 to 20, so the nerf's not that big. Right, it's, you know, 0 to 4%. Obviously, you don't require any AD, and the fact that the ratio is higher, right? It's 2.3 instead of 2.0, a 0.3 higher AD ratio, 0.3, right? Doesn't take that much to get to. So, hey, how much does it take for 0.3 attack damage to make up 5 damage? 17 bonus. That's not hard. So if you're executing someone at, you know, below 1/5 health, yeah, at all points in time, realistically, this is a buff, like a strict buff. If you're going to kill them, it's just stronger. And in fact, you know, with Mortal Will Online, adding an even higher AD ratio, that's now 0.45. Yeah, this is not going to be hard to buff. Stack them all together, this is going to happen. But yeah, if you're spamming Qs in lane to whittle someone down, especially support Panth, it's weaker. Even if you're playing solo lane Panth, it's weaker. But it does not take long to get enough AD to buff the crit one. It takes a while, but you'll eventually get there to buff the non-crit one. Trying to nerf him out of support so that he can be powerful enough to play in farming lane. Makes sense. Samira, definitely a bit strong. Overall, very, very strong champ. One of the best performing AD carries for a while. People have gotten better at her. Yeah, she's in a good spot. Or I should say a very strong spot, so should nerf, makes sense. So it's 5 to 1 seconds increased on the E, and you max E second, and then a flat 10% reduced attack speed on that as well. So here's the cooldown nerf. Pretty meaningful in the early to mid game. Again, it resets on killer assist, so that part doesn't matter. But yeah, if you're using E to dodge blitzcrank hooks or get away from ganks, or, you know, if you're using it to give yourself attack speed to go for a plate, it's more likely to be down for that extra 5 seconds when a gank comes in. You don't have it to dodge anymore. This will be felt. This does matter. This means her W has a 30-second cooldown and her E has a 20-second cooldown. She has some pretty long cooldowns now on her non-Q in the early game. That's pretty meaningful. And it'll be true for a while. Yeah, she often goes Essence Reaver, but still going to feel this for a while. As far as the attack speed's concerned, yeah, pretty meaningful here as well. Losing a pretty solid 8 to 5% attack speed. And I want to point out, by the way, that Samira often does AD stacking, right? Essence Reaver Infinity Edge Bloodthirster is a pretty common build on her. Yeah, you'll go Berserker's Greaves more often than not, but you're not getting a lot of attack speed from other sources. You're getting a lot from your E, and now your attack speed steroid is only 40% at level 13. That's not very high. This kind of pushes Samira a little bit towards getting a Zeal item somewhere in there. You still might not because the other item, you want the other items too much, right? Your spells are all AD ratios, none of them have attack speed ratios. You really want to stack flat AD, so you may never change that, which kind of further increases the pressure here, right? Compared to someone like Tristana, where you're going to get a Stormrazor and a Zeal probably in your second and third slot. Stormrazor first maybe sometimes. Samira doesn't have that luxury, so this is going to be more felt than on champions like Kai'Sa. Losing 10% attack speed on an attack speed steroid or gaining it, similarly. This is, pretty meaningful. Probably still just barely above 50%, but pretty closer to balanced. And people are still learning her, so they're going to keep, raising the win rate off of player skill, but I think a solid nerf. We go to Trundle, and Trundle now gets smooth linear scaling on his heal from nearby enemy death, as well as Frozen Domain getting a cooldown incentive to rank it up, which you would rank up second if you were playing top lane Trundle. So here's Trundle's passive healing. It has some interesting spikes here, such as right here, before it goes to 3. It goes up by almost 50%, but here's how much better it is. And it's actually pretty small. The amount of healing you're actually gaining is not gigantic. One thing I could have done is roughly mathed out how much health regen he's getting from Minion Wave and compare that to his base health regen as a champion to see how much regen increase he's really, really getting. I didn't. Sorry. But at the end of the day, the passive is 20% stronger in the early game and 10% stronger late game. That's solid. That's not a bad buff. Sure. As far as the cooldown incentive, if you're playing jungle Trundle, you max pillar seconds, so you're never getting this buff ever until level 14. But top lane Trundle wants to brawl, and so here, a pretty meaningful, honestly, cooldown buff here. You get more healing on the W, you get a bunch of attack speed and move speed on the W. At this point, considering you generally try to go Trinity Force on Trundle, as far as I can tell, you have W up actually all the time. This is a very, very meaningful buff to the W, which gives him, truly substantial uptime on this ability, and is a pretty big bump. I think this does a lot to top lane Trundle. This is a lot of lane sustain. This is a lot of lane... level 8 is a 1 second cooldown change, and you're veering away from the laning phase around that point in time. Considering level 6 is at 6 minutes, and you got to go 2 levels from there. You're, going 8, 9-ish minutes. By the time you have 3 seconds of cooldown, plates have dropped. So, it's not the biggest thing ever, but this is still meaningful. This is a big bump to top lane Trundle. It is a moderate bump to jungle Trundle. The big thing being that Trundle's going to heal a lot more in team fights. When the enemy Ornn dies, you're going to get 6% of his max health back, and that's a lot. So, enjoy your extra, 100-ish HP per champion death, which, not bad. It's not really 100. It's going to be more like 15, but still. Udyr is getting a Phoenix Stance buff. He got one a few patches ago. He's now getting the other part of Phoenix Stance, which is when you hit it, you have the AoE aura damage, and it's just being bumped by a pretty chill 25%. 40 becomes 50, 240 becomes 300. But hey, look at those clean numbers, 25%. Beautiful stuff. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. End of the day, Phoenix Stance was still substantially below Tiger. As far as when it was concerned, people are still playing Tiger because Phoenix is still trash. Is it there yet? I don't think so. This certainly makes Phoenix's jungle clear faster. It helps his PvP damage as well. You will get use out of this. The nice thing is you can press R and then go to bear stance, and you will keep getting the fire, floofs coming out, and it will deal damage. And yes, it will add up. It's probably still not enough, but I am glad to see this still happening. I am glad that there's Udyr Phoenix follow-ups. Cool beans. Nimbus Cloak gets a pretty substantial nerf. The actual move speed gets cut gets cut pretty heavily, and the move speed duration gets cut a little bit here as well, which means it's a very big nerf for Smite. It is a moderate nerf for middle duration things like Ghost, and you could debatably call it a buff. I wouldn't. It's still a small nerf for things like Flash and Teleport. So here's this set of numbers. This is basically taking the movement speed and multiplying it by the duration and saying, well, you're getting a total of 25% more movement. If you're going 10% faster for 2.5 seconds, you're kind of getting 25% of your movement speed. You're getting that much distance acquired. Similarly, 30% for 2.5 seconds, you're kind of getting 75% of your total movement speed as distance covered. And then you compare here, and it's like, well, you got 5% for 2 seconds. You got 20% for 2 seconds. You got 35% for 2 seconds. You can see that, yeah, the nerf is really heavily aimed at things like Smite. It's really not that bad of a nerf in terms of the amount of movement, gained for the mid-duration things like Barrier, and it's really, really not that big of a deal. And in general, shorter duration, higher intensity is almost always a bigger deal. So you could debatably call this a buff for longer duration things like Flash and Summon or Teleport. End of the day, that's what it is. I think it's a good nerf. Nimbus Cloak was pretty much ubiquitous on every jungler. It meant, by the way, that if you were someone like Hecarim, you actually wanted to go Red Smite instead of Blue Smite because you would just Nimbus Cloak for the move speed. Why bother getting the haste out of blue? And I want to point out that Nimbus Cloak really made Blue Smite bad because why bother Blue Smiting when you get move speed anyway from Nimbus Cloak? It meant you got both with Red Smite. Yeah, you didn't slow them, but who cares? So I am glad that this got changed. I will say that this is still going to be the case, though. Like, it is still 5% move speed for 2 seconds. Yeah, it's not huge anymore, which is a good thing. It maybe is still worth doing on junglers. But it does kind of feel bad that junglers literally get one choice, and it's red or blue smite. And that choice is partially taken away by a summoner spell that you're taking anyway. And it's like, did you really want blue smite? Or are you getting move speed? So I am glad it's getting nerfed, right? Nerfed enough that, you might actually have a choice to go blue smite now. That's a good thing. Another week of Clash, which is cool. ARAM balance changes, Earth balance changes, bunch of bug fixes. And it is late enough for me. It is noon. It is well past my bedtime. I appreciate y'all tuning in and watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.